Welcome back to Media 7, where we're discussing economic gloom with Bernard Hickey, Liam Dan and Tim Watkin. Before we resume, let's have a look at an interview on the ABC's Late Line programme this week with former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating.
Well, it's a catastrophe. It's way worse than it appears. The top 200 financial institutions in the world have suffered an average loss of value of 74%. The top 200, average loss of 74%. What we need is a completely new global political and economic settlement. We're going to be rid of the old G7. We've got to be rid of the old IMF. We've got to bring the surplus countries into the political framework. And if you look at the structure of the IMF, the Chinese get 3.7% of the vote. The Indians get 1.9%. The Europeans and the Americans get 51%. And there's just no way the Chinese Communist Party is going to hand over control of their currency and their political fortunes to a Washington-based US Treasury-run institution.
Paul Keating there on the ABC earlier this week, and if you want to see the rest of that interview, which is fairly electrifying, there'll be a link to it on the Media 7 blog. There'll be the address of that later on in the show. Bernard, talk of a complete restructure of the global financial system, every single institution reworked, remodelled. This would have been crank talk a year ago.
That's right, and for a former Prime Minister to come out and say it really chills the bones. I know Keating, having covered him as a reporter in Canberra. He is a brilliant, well-connected guy, even though he was turfed out as a Prime Minister. He knows what is going on behind the scenes there, and he's right to warn about this. We are essentially seeing a change in the way the global economy works, from one where much of the output was put together and exported from China and then consumed in North America and in Europe. That is changing. We are now going to see a restructuring of that, so that instead of savings going from North Asia into America, consumed and back to Asia again, we're going to have something different. And that's going to affect New Zealand too. And the most obvious connection there is, and Keating was referring to it, China's imports fell 43% in January. That is a collapse. And they import much of their raw materials from Australia, our largest trading partner. That's why Keating is so worried, and why we should be concerned too.
Of course, he's not the only one who has been saying this. And Brian Gould, who never quite made Prime Minister in Britain, has been saying much the same thing for about 5 years now. No one listened to him. Do you think maybe that people like Gould should have been listened to?
Well, you know, a worst case scenario is not the way that humans, perform and live their lives and succeed. I mean, that's one of the problems. So that the guys coming up with a worst case scenario are often on the fringes because it's a worst case scenario. The difficulty is that sometimes it happens and you have to readjust your thinking very quickly, and that's what we need to see happen.
So how does that change the way you do your job as a financial reporter?
Well, it's shifted. I think it's shifted. I mean, in terms of what's happened in the last few months, it's shifted from the relatively benign world of corporate takeovers and M&A activity and stuff that didn't affect real people's lives the same way to centre stage, and it's made us think a lot more seriously about the impact on people's lives. Obviously, I mean, it is grim. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about tone. I'm worried that I'm heading down a tack where I'm going to end up on a sort of Vera Lynn type tone. We know, seeing optimistically about meeting again, but knowing in our hearts that, it's fucking that bad. And
So who's going to tell that story, Tim? Because it does seem it's been, up till now, independent voices. People like Paul Krugman in the US who've been saying there is a problem.
Yep. Although to be fair, I mean, the talk about reforming the IMF and the World Bank has been around for a decade or more. I mean, there have been people pleading that the EU and the US can no longer dominate these world forums, that we needed to bring in the Brazils and the Russias, the Indias, the Chinas and so forth into that conversation and into the serious power positions. Yes, it's been the NGOs who've largely been arguing that, and they've been easy to bump off to some extent. But even late last year, I mean, we were talking about Bretton Woods 2 when they had the G20 meeting. It hasn't really gone anywhere, but that talk was going to keep going. But it is going to be, I think, maybe the conversational nature of the blogosphere that allows people to keep saying, hey, what happened about, where we're going to go next. How do we change these world structures?
Tim's exactly right here. If you're looking for independent voices who are going to come from outside the mainstream, they're the ones who have got the good stuff at the moment. And I find myself reading more and more the independent commentators, be it from universities rather than from central banks or from governments. People like Nouriel Roubini, who have come out and said over a year ago, this is going to happen, we're going to have to nationalise these systems. They're the ones who are pushing the agenda now. And a great example of that is the massive fraud announced, accused of the guy who ran the 2020 cricket. Turned out that was broken by a blogger in Venezuela. And I'm finding myself looking for these independent voices in the new media, just putting my hand up for the new media.
Well, I'm on your Twitter feed, and to be honest, I'm absolutely astonished by how many eye-popping stories you manage to be finding, on an almost hourly basis. There is a lot going on, isn't there?
It's astonishing the breadth and the depth of the commentary now in the blogosphere that isn't reflected in the mainstream press, simply because there's just not enough time. Stuff is happening so quickly. You can now quickly publish something and get it out to an extraordinarily wide audience if you're well read, and that's something I'm glad I'm part of it, that we're seeing.
Yeah.
But how much does it matter? I mean, they're still getting up and going to work and having a coffee in the morning in Iceland, aren't they?
There's never
the country's bankrupt.
Yeah, exactly. And you think back to 91. I mean, I know we were probably all younger and doing different things, but and all these different recessions in New Zealand's history. And let's remember, we're not statistically at anywhere near that bad in this country yet.
This is a luxury
compared
to
but I mean, what defines those eras? It's usually the music and the sports and and that's going to continue. I mean, unless God forbid we end up in sort of war territory or whatever. Having said that, we are going to see some more hard luck stories coming out of this country, unfortunately, and that's a reality that we're going to deal with, and it flows through socially. We know it flows through socially to the bottom, from the top to the bottom. This is very much so in this crisis, because it's all of a sudden the richest people in the world have lost 40% of their wealth or more, and they couldn't afford to lose that because of their debt position, and that's going to flow through, and it takes time to flow through to the bottom of the heap, I guess.
And that makes a really good point, because I mean, you say people are still getting up and going to work in Iceland. Well, 3 times as many people in Iceland now aren't getting up and going to work than there were a few months ago. And that kind of upheaval has social costs. And so what I'm looking for, and certainly through the rest of 2009, is how the economic crisis becomes a social crisis. I mean, you look at what's happening in Eastern Europe now, relatively young, unstable countries who are having all kinds of economic meltdowns. How does that play out in the social sphere? If you suddenly hit massive unemployment, there's a certain amount of stability in Western countries, but in a lot of other countries, Pakistan, classic example, going to the IMF cap in hand at the moment. What happens if Pakistan, already tense on various borders, already
we really
in
don't
trouble?
want Pakistan to be a failed state.
Who are the kids that are causing all the trouble in gangs right now? They grew up in the shadow of 91, actually, and a lot of the social unrest that happened then, unemployed parents.
Should we be hearing less about boy races and more about the big economic issues?
Well, the recession will take care of boy races because they won't get the credit for their cars. So
just one final question. I sense that there is an element for all of you in reporting this of the old line about journalism being the first draft of history. Is that how it feels, like you're reporting something that people
suddenly
will talk about like in 100 years' time?
Yes.
I'm actually look forward to getting up in the morning so that I can go straight to the blogs that I read and to watch CNBC and see what's come out, because I knew something will change every day. And it's from my point of view as a financial journalist, this is my background on having covered markets in Sydney and London and Singapore. Watching it from here and being able to watch it too online now is the most exciting thing, although I do have some trepidation about what it means.
I'm glad you're happy about it. I suspect we're very far from the end of this discussion, but it is time to move on. Thanks to Bernard Hickey, Liam Dan and Tim Watkin. Now, the phrase media circus applies in more than one way to the Top Gear show that breezed through Auckland last week. Simon Pound went to see what he could make of it.
Top Gear started as a TV show where blokes talk about cars and compete in crazy challenges. But it has grown into a highly evolved entertainment product, complete with merchandising, celebrity status, and a travelling live show that recently hit Auckland.
Most of all, as I've said many times, I adore New Zealand. It's a fantastic country.
It all adds up to a case of the media circus coming to town. Media organiser Paul Blomfeld had a hit on his hands. It has it all: explosions, burnouts that put Christchurch teenagers to shame, and a choreographed show a bit like Disney on ice. But Goofy never put his foot in it like this.
In England, we have this one-eyed Scottish idiot. I've said that now.
You said that out loud as well, yeah.
That's Jeremy Clarkson in Sydney, the stop before Auckland on the World Tour, attacking a disability.
This one-eyed Scottish idiot.
People were outraged. A planned press conference like that one-eyed one was cancelled.
This has never happened before.
To make up for no press conference, media were thrown a photo call, a look at the rehearsal, and a press conference with the Stig. Probably the most embarrassing thing about this terrible joke, the Stig is famous for not talking, is that the media bought it.
What are the chances of you at least, getting a bit of just going out for a few beers or something like that?
I just wanted to know, why don't you show your face?
It seems the organisers worked out that in a vacuum, you can pretty much dictate the content. Shutting down the one-eyed controversy is good, as it keeps the sponsors happy. Because the sponsors, this room full of cars, for example, are the other part of this media parasite relationship. Now, what they're hoping for is for some reporter to decide to do their piece to camera in this room full of luxury cars, like this beautiful BMW, or this lovely Audi, Porsche. Which is why sometimes the news can be a little difficult to differentiate from the ads. And the reporters did just that.
Some of the world's most desirable cars, with everything from Porsches to Bentleys to Lamborghinis.
Can we have a quick ticky tour around the cars?
We've got a Porsche down here, there's an Audi down that way, a few Audis actually.
No offence to TV3 or TV1 on this. What else could the media really do but be led? It is bankable, shiny content, cheap to cover, exciting to watch, but ultimately about as useful as a Stig press conference.
Simon Pound, who's probably right off the comps list after that report. Now, in this week's Take Two, Sarah Daniel marks a grim anniversary and wonders where we are now on the issue of capital punishment.
It's a long time since capital punishment was in the news. This week marks 52 years since Walter Bolton, convicted of murdering his wife, was sent to the gallows. Even then there were lingering doubts over his guilt, but newspapers at the time boldly stated he did the crime, he paid the penalty. The last time the death penalty issue surfaced was 10 years ago, but experts in that same documentary cautioned against it.
The reason I oppose it is that the chances of convicting an innocent person are too high.
In the United States, if you're black, a double jeopardy exists.
Studies in the United States show that the race of your victim is highly correlated to the decision to prosecute a case as a capital crime and the imposition of a capital sentence. So if you kill a black person in the United States, you're much less likely to have the death penalty visited on you than if you kill a white person.
For victims of terrible crimes, the issue is sometimes more clear-cut.
That would be justice. I'd be able to say, right, Mum and Dad, here we are. We've fought for this, and your deaths weren't in vain.
Have attitudes changed since then? Columnist Michael Laws says, "Show no mercy, hang 'em high."
The brothers Curtis will cost the state more than $3 million. Their lives just aren't worth that much. Let's reintroduce the death penalty for murder, not as a deterrent, but as the appropriate punishment for these people.
For Laws, it may be a simple matter of an eye for an eye, but perhaps he sees things more clearly from his personal pulpit. But for those who witnessed executions, like former New Zealand Herald journalist Ron Taylor, it remains a different matter.
Having seen an execution too, I might say that you don't go back lightly.
Sarah Daniel there. After the break, it all goes geek.